Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay. First of all, congratulations, Rachel, for the Naomi Letters. It's so exciting that your second book is out and so wonderful to share space like this. So I live in Hawaii now. I used to live in Chicago, and now I live in the middle of the ocean where I have no friends. So it's really wonderful to be here and hear you and talk with you. I'm going to share 6 poems today. I'm going to read 2 poems from my book and 4 new poems. And I'll make way for Cortney. Between autumn equinox and winter solstice today, I read a Korean poem with a line, "Today you are the youngest you will ever be. Today I am the oldest I have been. Today we drink buckwheat tea. Today I have heat in my apartment. Today I think about the word chada in Korean. It means cold. It means to be filled with. It means to kick, to wear. Today we're worn. Today you wear the cold, your chilled skin. My heart kicks on my skin. Someone said, winter has broken his windows. The heat inside and the cold outside sent lightning across glass. Today my heart wears you like curtains. Today it fills with you. The window in my room is full of leaves ready to fall. Chada, you say, it's tea. We drink. It is cold outside. So that's my Chicago poem. It's based on something that somebody actually told me who was from Chicago, and he was talking about how when he was little, their windows would break because it got so cold outside. So that's an old poem, and I want to read a poem I've never read out loud at a reading before, and it's called Foreigner. And I want to read this poem because yesterday my spouse and I were driving around and I saw a ladybug on the window and I screamed, and I was thinking just at that point I was thinking about how much I love nature and love living in Hawaii and all of that, and as soon as a bug comes and says hi, I'm like I shriek. Anyway, so I rolled down the window and she flew away, but I was reminded of this poem. It's called Foreigner. You said you counted the ladybugs on our way home, that you counted exactly 20. You lifted one off your shirt, and it flew into sparsely leaved branches. You asked me to pronounce Korean words. Say winter again. Say autumn. 겨울, 가을. Say I sometimes think of you. Say it is just so. You repeat each like a tender bird. Ladybugs hibernate in warm houses. Did you know that they're called Asian lady beetles too? Are they transplants like us? Ladybugs are only pests by their presence. I wouldn't harm you either, not even your belongings. Next to you, my small mind shivers like some 40 wings. Okay, I want to transition to new poems. This one is called Body of. My mother, teaching me how to protect my body. When a man touches you here, yell, I am a body that will bear a child. How was I, a child, to understand that as the sanctity of my body? How was I to know, to say, the body without that potential is also whole and holy. A man who touches a child does not care whether she will one day be fertile. A dear friend, on making the body useful, encourages me to have babies. What does it mean to say, I have my body? I have a brain, I have a life, a heart, I've said before, but I meant only mine, without knowing there were outlines of other bodies fleshing in my center, being the body of woman, for whom body means collective, as it is for the body of evidence, of knowledge, Here I present my body of work, my body of water. Here, my body, body. But are we, of our bodies, we of this nation, this body of land? Bodies are thrown across oceans, across lands. Bodies lie bleeding through the evidence of bullets. Honest bodies bleeding honestly. In order to continue living, we try to leave evidence of our lives. We accumulate bodies in whatever way we can. Men leave themselves in women's bodies. Friends, I am just now ready to love my own. I love my father's eyebrows on my face, and I love my mother's calves on my legs, and I love the parts of my body that I do not name. Let that be enough. The future of this land is uncertain in how high the flames, the waters will be. The land in which I give up something every day. This land in which I still bleed and bleed. Okay. What carries us? First, there was the horse. Imagine creatures as majestic, standing. All their lives they stand, withholding. Imagine being tamed, learning to be still, to be speed. Imagine birds as large as horses. We would be flying, grabbing a majestic creature by its color. In cylinders of metal, we are four-legged beast lives of liminal spaces. One time I was so tired of flying, I wondered if I will spend all my life packing, then unpacking. A complaint of privilege. We are such spending creatures. And when I say we are beasts, is that a metaphor? Metaphor, according to Papasteriadis, is also transportation between absence and presence, articulating action. Its very process in times of extremity is akin to prophecy. I like the idea of transportation as articulation, that the end of metaphor is a kind of arrival, like getting off this train at an unknown stop. So when I say we are beasts, perhaps what I mean to do is remember that predators have forward-facing eyes, and we do grab others by the collar, and we do fly in metal in preparation for the kill. What I want to do is slow down time. Imagine love as a horse. Think about us, a distance apart, only a flying thing could connect us. Standing and pacing, tamed and watching, then finally with each other, laughing as if to collapse, unbridled as wild horses. In this era of brevity, in this era of metal, in this era of abbreviation, yes, I am trying to make you think of me longer. Yes, this whole time, the bird, the train, the whole thing, about metaphor, I said, to say this, that this is what carries us, the slow consideration of what each other is, can be. And first, there was the horse. Okay, 2 more poems. Thank you so much for your attention. The blades. You cut down on the gopher in a single crisp stroke in the garden. In it also, your mother's prized orange tree, a blue jay your family feeds and has trained. I picture the gopher no longer struggling in the trap inside the water pipe for the sprinkler, throbbing over grass and stones. Then you must have slid open the door to the dining room, leaned the shovel on the tree. I heard the story years ago in California. In the time of pandemic, alone together, I read too much news. Trump defends using Chinese virus label, woman assaulted in Manhattan, blamed for COVID-19, racism is a virus. I obsess, knowing our place as Asians in this country, the exemplar minority with advanced degrees and gadgets, but superior meekness. Knowing our desirability was built to reassert Western centrality. That too, a type of technology. To keep us in check, a Texas man took it to himself and stabbed an Asian father and two sons, cutting their faces open. One of the children has a gash pointing to his eye, the damage itself in the shape of a blade, a delta, wanting to breach another opening. Watch. Watch the wild turkeys roam the neighborhood, unconcerned, banal, and ugly. Yet you love these animals. When our old friend's cat died, you had cried. He was 18, had a good, adored life. You had mourned so for someone else's animal. So when your mother told me at the dining table about the gopher, I was shocked. But that too was kindness, your shovel. For the slowly dying animal, injured beyond saving, for entering the human world in the shape of a pipe, a wet reach to a diorama of the natural world. Embarrassed and ashamed, you looked away. As we sat, in that moment, two Koreans in a white world, I wanted to marry you, to protect the person who loves like no other, whose kindness is unlike anyone's I've known. Foolish and naive, yes. Every day someone leans the shovel and knife, real and not, against the gentler thing, after striking another that looks like us, for crawling too close out of the technology they built. Yet, today, feeling momentarily safe in our room, I can ask what you did to the gopher. You buried the animal, you say, in the same earth it came from. Related matters. I look at the ocean like it's goodbye. Somewhere it is touching a land laying prey to fire. My grieving mother brings the forest inside, a green excess. When she repots the trees, it is not unlike changing diapers. But she no longer tends to the small, abject frames of the dying. These days, everything feels like the end. A few days ago, a typhoon shaved glass off buildings. A woman in her 60s bled to death after it cut the window into her arms. The name of the wind, Maisak, means teak tree in Khmer, I learn. The timber retains its aromatic fragrance to a great age, I learn. I am always learning. What is it that I want to know? There is nowhere in this world that I want to live. I look at your face like it's goodbye. There is nowhere to go. I shut my window because what else can I do? Tomorrow's typhoon is called Haishen, meaning sea god in Mandarin. I confess, I want to live. Nowhere, but still, with great desperation, I want. What is it that you want? Tell me, is your face the same as mine? Tell me, do we see the same things? Tell me, we are the same eyes, burning through the night. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Emily, for sharing all this beautiful work. And that last poem, I have been obsessed with that poem for a minute now, so I'm happy you read that one. And I'm excited and grateful and thankful to be here with you all this evening, celebrating the arrival of Rachel's, new collection. And, I don't want to hold things up too much, so I'll share a few poems with you all from my most recent release, Doppelgangbanger, and then we'll just kind of get the party, keep the party moving. But before I dive in, I also just want to give a quick shout out and thanks to Women and Children First for allowing us this space this evening for celebration and for fellowship through words. Thank y'all so much. let's see, where am I going to go? So I'm going to bounce around the book a little bit. Usually I try to have more of a theme, but since this is like a virtual kind of visit to Chicago, like I'm just going to read stuff that like makes me think of home. So this first poem is titled Hip Hop Introspective. Starting point, South Side, Chicago, mid-90s, the glory days, rocking my high top fade. I'm mesmerized by a poster on my uncle's wall, the black tinted sunglasses, Jamaican dreads, young Stevie Wonder sitting beside the smiling Bob Marley, looking like two sides of a DJ's vinyl, something to be sampled, cut, and sold like substances I'm not wise to yet. When records spin, I listen. This is how children learn here, how they come into everything they already are. See, my classmates and I come from all over, from something, from nothing, but come to the same school, on the same bus, religiously, as though we were actually confirmed Catholics. Every day, our ears dialed into 107.5 WGCI. Every ride, repeating every word, nodding our heads like we have naps on the brain. Nappy or not, the bus speakers are blowout cones. We are Afro-American kids. The music, more fitting for us than the collared shirts for black boys, plaid skirts for black girls. It sounded like us from the inside of our mama's wombs. New jacks with kick, and somehow, still, too explicit, gritty, aggressive, skins we will grow into to be killed softly. One girl I talk with has braids like Lauryn Hill, 6 years old, already has to let herself into her grandmother's empty apartment, handle keys. Somewhere, there is a guitar she will never play. In due time, she will be the one who tells me Tupac is dead, and a blood relation of mine soon goes in the same way, distantly from me. The Crossroads music video begins to haunt me. Biggie bites a few bullets. My next door neighbors get burglarized, not in South Side proper, though it moves closer than it already is on our daily drive. I move farther out when mom gets a better job. Dad needs a wheelchair now, a hard knock life. I miss hearing Boys to Men and Blackstreet everywhere I go. Even the name Backstreet sounds stolen to me. Meanwhile, an album on miseducation has only my pictures inside. I hide my intelligence from my peers as an act of protection. Eminem gives all of them an excuse for making conversation with me, and I hate Mathers for it for at least 4 years. Kids ask what FUBU means. White girls look at me constantly. DMX never seems to be screaming. The underground heads north on my playlist while an old poster peels away from the wall. I'm beside myself, almost always. A side, B side. Next up, that's my page number. Etymology of gangster. And here, the original one saying hello to my little friend is my own hand. Oh, so carefully cradling my equipment like an athletic cup, though likewise being a boast toward the boy in the mirror that is black but ain't buck. His jaw literally glass and needing to be freed of nerve, made to feel nada. It takes hard practice to accept the grammar of the G's body language as second nature, to represent physically how the slick replacement of the sound with an sound simultaneously implies more effortless and more ruthless. Eric Easy E. Wright, of all people, once lunched in George H.W. Bush's White House. So don't tell me about dead ends. Don't tell me about the dead, since I'm clearly one of the realest alive. All my life, church ladies have said, glorify, 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 and that was game if I ever heard it. As I see it, in a bigoted society, I've either got the respect that the homies give me, or I've got no respect at all. Plus, God forgives anyway, and Jesus was black like dude that played Nino Brown. Name a better way to make the cold, cruel world than this. We didn't write the rules governing our lives, so we had to break them all on principle. It's been said, sweet singing Frank Sinatra ran with the mafia. Al Capone's picture hangs on the wall at Portillo's, and you want to tell me the country has beef with crime when it really has beef with me and mine. What didn't click with Ice Cube and them in all y'all's heads is exactly what did in ours. Since you gave us hate when we wanted justice, something had to come of it. Remember, energy is neither created nor destroyed, fool. So what if I'm a ruffian who would only wear a suit to my own funeral? Go on, throw that salt somewhere else. I'm your gross domestic product, America. I'm a lie you sold yourself. Only my mama can judge me, and you wouldn't believe what I'm buying her as soon as I get on. Paradise, paradise, paradise. A big ass crib, a white maid. Suburban Dictionary. I think there's a little white man inside all of us. Though my look precedes me in this case, I'm not talking about the shack creeping slave master, but the crown funded discoverer of pre existing things, the explorer of the exotic via means aquatic or terrestrial. Oh, looky here. Another settlement by a river, between two rivers, in fact. Fresh off the boat of the skies, I walk among the savage appetites tearing into thin steak strips and cheese whiz with pointed teeth. How they strut, I study. The men dress their faces in bales of black hair from cheek to cheek. The women braid or lock or unlock or undertuck theirs beneath the most humble and homely cloths. My ears snag on the rusty dialect like fabric. My eyes widen when I recognize the continent staring me back in the ego, a vowel and three consonants exact. JAWN. Entry, dated 2003. A person, place, or thing. Oh, looky here. I've been a person, a place, a thing. It used to be they would put every rap record in my mouth and press play. It used to be my body was Africa herself, something with boundaries they didn't understand. It used to be Charleston Chew or C Murder. They'd call me in place of my mother's wishes. C Murder. First entry. The killing of another human being under conditions specifically covered in law, I explain. Second entry, slang. Something extremely difficult or perilous, I explain. Third entry, a group or flock of crows, I explain. I explain the world while they circle ominously in omen. Oh man, I really want them to just go away, or that I fade away, or they catch the fade from me, or hair clippers give me a fade and they can't recognize me anymore. Except for the savagery, of course, measured in melanin and my talent for tearing through the meat of grammar with my teeth. Fools got me tweaking off this ghetto glossary gimmick for real. Them, always taking my word to take my word, jocking, jacking, whatever. Just let me live where I live is what I say, or be trying to. Elegy for a false sense of security. Tell me how you entered this poem, how you even got in here. Where my parentals come from is where I'm coming from, and where I'm coming from is from we lock the front door and the back and the side and can't spare a single extra key. Where I'm coming from is from we shut all the windows tight like our eyes to an ugly view. A jail, if I ever saw one, and maybe I did, and maybe that was enough for me. Maybe you made the mistake by coming here, unannounced, uninvited. It takes a lot of talent to step in someone's crib and be welcome without any alarms going off. So shake your ass something dangerous if you can. Sing me a song real sexy like or be suck out of luck if I feel like shooting strangers today. If home is where the heart is, then 4 red bullet wounds across the chest of the city's flag say everything there is about my feelings toward you in the whole damn world right now. Because it was my own blood this time, and yet I'm still here. And the funny thing about that town and this one is that they both burned down once. And down the hall there, burning bud, and I want some kind of sorta, but without the friends. Which makes you foe, I suppose. As if you are the presence of all colors and I am the absence of said colors. But maybe I got it backwards, twisted it all up. It just hurts to have my hair pulled even if it's by my own hand. My mind is spinning blanks inside every chamber, everywhere. I turn on the TV, they're shooting boys like what I used to be before I wasn't anymore. And when did that happen? And what am I now? Are you the phantom or me? Me or none of the above? The last shadow I cast on a sunny Sunday stole my wallet and bought this gun and all the rounds at the bar too. Where I'm coming from, when in love, squeeze. When lonely, loan yourself some time and don't pay it back. Beware, because I'm both lonely and in love, like the living embodiment of the code switch. I'm polluted air and poisoned water and whatever else they say, except when I say I'm not, and I'm not one to play for a fool for the record. Fear me. I'm godly and I'm just. And just get the hell out, demon, and do come again. Come again. It's my igneous ire toward you that keeps me alive, wire, and alive. Okay. Got time for like 2 more, so let's get with it. Where we going next? Okay. Gangsters, disciples, for Ardoche. Beloved, you take me there. Hold me down. Cuff me if I like it. The bad boy's punishment or the blacks. Your daddy is white, but what does that suggest for the roses at my funeral or yours? What shade of grief would they be? Colors matter around here. We are symmetrical in our patterns and pains. While you lay there bleeding, I hold your hand and pour out a little lillet for you. Half of the time you hate me enough to lay hands on me. We come to blows because it feels good and let live. Bless those broken homes that rubber banded us together, baptized us in dust and danger, never knowing when to pull out of a dicey situation. And so I wipe the blade clean after it's made ribbons of the flesh. You remain ready to take that heat from me. Handle product. We both have records we're running from like errant needles. I know we're on probation. It may come down to you or me, and a real gangster must choose themselves. And to close, I think we will do A couple Chicago poems. I don't know which one to pick. All right, now we're going back. Trigonometry. For you, the first triangle, Father and Son and Holy Ghost. And you hear from everybody Southern fried in your life, the devil be a master mimic, be a mathematician, speaking the language of the boot that kicked him out of those pearly gates. And you're smart, so you take notes. Sanctuary sits between 108th and 109th Streets on Halstead. That's in the hundreds. High numbers. Too many names of dead boys for you to count. And your church sits locked behind an iron gate. Black like both sides it divides. Both sides root for a basketball team that ran the triangle offense all the way to glory. And Jordan is God to this day. And people have died for his feet. So many over the years, nobody counts. And Chicago is the angle between sides, between brothers, a tangent of death. You question if the letters in your textbook are pronounced sign or sin. You know the devil be a shapeshifter. Nothing about this particular triangle is right. You're smart. You take notes. See that same shape in your history class drawn in red. A long trail of blood between Africa, Europe, and America that gives the ocean a crooked mouth on the map. It speaks to you, begs an old practiced recall. Slaves, obey thy masters. And you're smart. So you realize that all of you Southern frieds have been had, are owned to this very day. It's all algebra, trig, you say, jotting your name boldly atop your test. That test itself being just another A plus, plus, plus. Thank you. Now it's time for Rachel.
What's up? Hi, everybody. Thanks so much to Women and Children First for having us tonight. Thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Emily. I am just sitting here in all of your work, and I'm excited to add some poems from the Naomi Letters to the incredible chorus of poetry being read tonight. Got my copy here. I'm going to hop right in. I'm going to read a smidge from the beginning of the book, but I'm actually going to read, which I haven't done yet, from the end of the book. And I'll talk about that a little bit. I've been thinking a lot about the end of the book lately as we turn over into a new season here in Chicago. And I will mention for realism, right, since we are in Chicago, my first reading on the tour that's based here where I live, for authenticity, you will hear the train go by, and that's just part of the fun. So this is September 5th, 2016. The poems in this book, the titles are all dates. So you'll see that as a kind of common thread throughout tonight. So this is pretty early in the collection, in summer, which is the first section of the book. September 5th, 2016. I want to read you a poem. Pink sky in the morning, it opens. A girl's sky. When you look at me, do you see a woman who only knows how to love a man? These were the only stories read to me. This fault, too, is mine alone. Slowly, the trees become visible, Olds writes, and the spaces between them. This line makes me think of you, the white space in your letters. All my life, I have looked out at the world and never seen between. I clung to each tree I could touch without moving. But here you are, Naomi, and I write to you at dawn. Imagine being able to walk into the woods without fear. The black sky holds all colors close. Anything could happen. I will wait here, reading, for the sun to rise, to show you what it decides. September 10th, 2016. In one version of the story, I find you by way of several minor accidents. A girl in high school used to tell us, look for the guys who drive stick. It means they know what they're doing. Ask them for a ride, she'd say. Make them show you. That winter, 2 boys nearly died speeding down the town's back roads. That winter, I bent over a boy in his borrowed car. His became the first body I studied beside my own. Alone after, I would reach for the electric toothbrush, the wooden spoon, and search for the places he lit for a moment, then darkened. I thought myself the only animal in a frozen city full of men, but I was wrong. I thought I'd starve, but I was wrong. I gotta say, it's still a little disorienting to me to read some of the like sexy poems, the more like explicitly erotic poems, and then like see the dirty dishes that are just like right there. There's something still, you know, about the virtual part of the tour that, you know, we're reading sexy poems in our apartment, but I've got another one coming. I'm shifting now to actually pretty close to the end of the book, and I wanted to read, I just have 3 poems from the end that I'm going to read next before we hop into some chat. I've been thinking a lot about the end of this book as we move into a new phase with COVID. I wrote this book well before the pandemic. It was accepted for publication about 6 weeks before our first lockdown. But as I revisit the end of this book, in which the speaker is working through a lot of really difficult mental illness issues and is starting to sort of very tentatively imagine what it might be like to re-enter the world, you know, in 2017 and in a very deeply interior, isolated moment. I'm thinking about these poems a lot as I begin to, as many of us are, very tentatively maybe tiptoe outside into the world and see loved ones in this new context. So I certainly didn't write these with anything like COVID in mind. I couldn't have ever imagined we'd be in this situation. But I wanted to read these 3 poems in sort of conversation with this new moment and the way in which sometimes poems speak to feelings or events that or desires that you have that you didn't even know at the time you needed. So this is March 23rd, 2017. It takes just the right amount of deceit for me to stay in love, lying measured by the palmful, the play-acting lie. The lie that wears vintage off the rack, then sits at the kitchen table beside you, looking effortless. The lie that gives good head, then lets you fall asleep without reciprocation. I haven't lied to you yet, Naomi, but I'm practiced at the art. I've tiptoed over the line separating tell me you love me and do you love me while cupping water in my hands. A teacher once told me create the poem in revision, not in writing, to cherish the artifice more than the realization. So I dissolved her advice in the water. I lifted the potion to my lips. I'm choosing to use this energetic revision for you, Naomi. I'm choosing it for you. May 9th, 2017. This has a couple of lines from one of my favorite poems from one of my favorite poets, who's Muriel Rukeyser. So you'll hear her kind of percolating in the middle. May 9th, 2017. Don't you enjoy the power of knowing when love ends or of not knowing? Hear the delicious grief of abandonment, or else the drive away from the beloved's house, the windows open, the rain pouring into the bucket seat. Here I collect your shed curls, your bent open bobby pins in my palm. Here the book tented on the nightstand. If the light had not melted clouds and plains to beauty, if light had not transformed that day, I would have leapt. Rukeyser calls confessing effort. I have liked lamps in evening corners, she writes, and quiet poems. There has been fear in my life. Of all my fears, you represent none of them, Naomi, or else I still do not know what you represent. So this is the last poem I'll read tonight, and it is the last poem in the spring section of the book there's a coda at the end that comes about a year later, which is its own spring section, but it's a one lonely poem at the end. So this is the poem that sort of ends the book in terms of the year of the relationship that the speaker is chronicling in these letters to Naomi. So in the beginning of the book, I mention a bridge, which I don't know if there's any Pittsburgh folks in the audience tonight. I wrote this book when I was living in Pittsburgh, and I lived, this may be redundant to say, I lived near a bridge, a lot of bridges in Pittsburgh, but I lived near a very specific bridge that goes over Frick Park. It's just a flat, 4-lane street bridge. And a man had committed suicide by jumping off that bridge when I was living right down the road. So the book kind of opens with that scene in the letter, and the bridge appears again here at the book's end as the speaker is starting to, as I mentioned earlier, like navigate this newness, like putting feet on the ground in this new world in this new way. So I'll end here, and then we'll slide over to chat a bit. I'm very excited. June 5th, 2017. I imagine you feeling the heat on your shoulders as you leave your apartment. Maybe you touch the spot where the sun warms you 2 inches above and to the left of your clavicle. My neighbors planted their tulips in March. I don't know why I didn't tell you. And this week the buds opened wide, became another sort of flower entirely. In the afternoons, the humid air splits and it rains and rains. I can see the bridge in the distance from my window, the steam rising from the park underneath, but the obscuring trees swell thicker with the changing season as each day passes. Soon, all I will see is green. On the other side of the window, the poem today says, I don't wonder where you are anymore. Naomi, you're right. It's time for me to go outside. So that ends the poem portion of the evening. And again, Cortney and Emily, thank you for reading. Incredible work. I think we're going to kick it back over to Em to open us with a question, and we'll start there and see how much time we've got, and kind of, yeah, that's that.
Yes. Oh, thank you, both of you. Oh my gosh, so much for reading from your second books. And Rachel, again, congratulations. I'm so honored to read with you and celebrate with you. So there's a question that I have for both of you, and I hope it'll help me work on my second book. So you have your second book out, and I just wondered if you could share your experience kind of formulating ideas around the second book, and whether it was different from writing your first one, and what other considerations went in.
Sorry, I tried to get off mute. But yeah, I think I have an interesting perspective on that one because of how both the first and second book kind of came into being for me. My second book, for folks that pick it up, or that may be familiar with the first book or what I've written in the past, like the second book is, I think, at least the subject matter or content is like more of what I think folks would anticipate from the first book. And the reason kind of why that happened is that I had actually started drafting the second book before the first one was ever a thing. It was, the first book was more of an urgent kind of impulsive write, in the sense that the poems were just, they preoccupied my mind. They kept coming and they kept coming and they kept coming. And I was trying to figure out how to do something productive with them. And so they weren't the poems I intended to be focused on at the time, but they were the poems that were calling to me at the time. So that meant that when I came back to what is now the second book, I came back to it with a completely different orientation around what I was doing and what I was trying to do. I think for me, that orientation was informed by what the first book accomplished, and in thinking about kind of like inviting readers into kind of like the macro machinations of my mind, whereas like more of the personal element had been missing. So I started thinking of like, what can the second book do on the street level, right, to kind of like inform what was happening at a larger scale, right, in the first book. And starting to think of them, although they are very different stylistically, but thinking of them as like pieces of a larger puzzle, right? Which is like the body of work. I think, when we go into our first book, like we're putting so much into it, right? It's like the culmination of like so much living into this one object. And I think like it can be like a place where we can get stuck. But I like to remind folks, right, that that a book is also just a unit of something, right? It's a unit of that larger like work that you're doing. And I think like kind of taking that orientation with this book allowed the poems to open up in completely new ways to me. Like a lot of really generative, creative like writing and like concepts and ideas came after that like mental switch in my head. And that's how the second book eventually became finished and wasn't just and it wasn't just an extension of the first book, but something entirely on its own, but complementary at the same time. So like that's kind of how I approached at least this initial writing of it. And then, comes the revision and all that good stuff. But yeah.
I love this question. And Cortney, I'm so glad that you mentioned that this process wasn't like perfectly linear for you. Like you wrote all of book one and then sat down and said, this is done. And then sat down and wrote all of book two, because I was thinking when we started emailing and thinking about this question that, you go on like a bookstore listing. And for me, there's two books, right? That is a true fact. There is the book I wrote and published that came out of my MFA thesis, which I think is a common story for a lot of folks, that the first book is the book that maybe grew in a graduate program. And then 7 years go by and here we are today and here's book two. So that's like one version of the story. That's kind of like if you were looking in the giant lake that was my brain, what would be floating on the top? But the truth for me was that the first book, people were invested in me finishing because I'd committed to an MFA program. So I had the thesis that grew into a book. It found a home at a wonderful press. And that press, Texas Tech, has this great first book poetry prize that's kind of the end of your relationship with them. So I sort of knew once that book found a home that I was there with one published book and then the world in front of me. And for me, the story is a little different because I wrote another book that I spent a couple years on and realized at a certain point I'd started sending it around. I'd shown it to friends. I'd published a lot of the poems. You can, find them out in the world if you look me up. And had a moment where, kind of like you said, Cortney, while I was starting to ping that book around, was writing these weird letters early in the morning and was like, I have all this other stuff going on that I need to talk about, and it's not available to me in that space of that previous manuscript. And I was so hungry to keep writing these letters, and it was the thing that captivated my attention. So at a point, I was holding to what I thought were maybe two finished books, and what it ended up being true was that one kind of had served as compost for the other. I thought I had two gardens, and I had one that ended up growing the other. So I think that especially when you're still looking for a home for your book, there's that pressure of like, I have to get this thing finished and then move on to the next project. And that just wasn't what ended up happening for me. So I think a lot about that middle project, because it probably was like 80 or 90 pages of work, that fell into this new project and that exists in pieces here and there in literary magazines and online, but ultimately wasn't the thing that I woke up feeling urgent about. And that was the Naomi Letters that I finally was like, this is the book that, I'm emailing drafts to my friends when I'm done. I'm like, can you wake up and look at this? And like, here's what's, really like I'm turning over in my mind. And then from there, that things, and this is probably a whole separate conversation, like what happens when you go from like, I have this finished manuscript to like, I'm holding book two in the bookstore. But for me, the first book felt like I kind of knew, I had that community around me. I felt like I had a better, like, I think Cortney, you said this well, like you have a sense of what the first book is as an object, an artistic object. And then you're like out in the world and you're like, I could write one more book. I could write 10 more books. I could write no more books. And whatever happens next is sort of what happens when you sit down every day. So that was sort of my experience. Was I thought I was going down one path and then realized what I was really waking up with like energy for was this whole other project that became that became the Naomi Letters. And I'm curious, actually, Emily, like you said, you read mostly new work tonight. Where are you in this process, if you don't mind talking about it? You know, are you kind of generating? Are you working towards something specific? Or where are you in this world?
Yeah, it's really helpful and delightful to hear from both of you about just your process of writing the second book. And I don't know, you know, I think at the pace that I'm going to be 74 when my second book comes out. But I recently listened to the Monica Sook episode of the Versus podcast with Dinesh and Franny, and what she said really resonated with me. So she said she thinks that the next book is going to be about desire. And if the first book was looking toward the past, you know, kind of recounting intergenerational trauma and history, family history, but also, you know, national history. The desire is future oriented. Actually, I think Franny said that in that context, that, you know, it's about what you want to happen, what you want to manifest. And I was thinking, you know, I think that's what I'm working towards as well. Like my first book is also kind of past oriented in that, you know, it's like, it's all the stuff I experienced up to this point in my life, but also, you know, things that happened in Korea, and how it's reforming in different ways in my life. But I always say that, you know, I think the end of my first book is gesturing towards tenderness. And I think I want to go back to theorizing poetry as a space in which I, you know, care for myself. I think that's how I came to poetry in the first place, like when I really became kind of committed to it. Because linguistically, I thought it was a safe space for me to be in. You know, as an immigrant, it was kind of an unruly place. I often felt like an unruly body. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna steal Monica's answer. I think I'm working towards desire and just different kinds of desire, right? And how I am giving language to it. So.
God, that's incredible. I know. I think I'm realizing maybe we should tag in Melt. I don't know how we're doing for time. This could go on for 3 more hours, but I know folks got stuff going on. So how are we doing, friend? Nope, you're muted. There we go.
We got time for a few more questions between you all.
Okay, great. Well, I guess I can jump in. I have so many. And this is also just a little bit of a personal disclosure for anyone else out there watching this. This was probably the least creative and least like poetically fertile year of my life. I really struggled with writing in the past year, but I'd be curious to hear from either of you what your daily sort of writing practice looks like these days. And like I said, I'm heading it off by saying I feel like I'm relearning from the very beginning how to write anything, let alone like something that I could call a poem with like my full chest. But I'd love to hear how you're sort of in the wake of the past year navigating this question of like, how are you making art? Are you making art? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, process is such a strong word. Like, there's been no process, if that makes sense. It's been, you know, for so many reasons, as we all have lived through a doozy of a year. And I would say that anything creative that I've been able to generate in that time has been more by happenstance. It's been like waves, you know what I mean? Like, something will come to me and I'll try to capture it before it like scurries away and I forget about it. And I think that's just kind of been the mode, right? And there was a point in time, I think, before COVID, where that disruption or kind of that kind of haphazard navigation of like idea and emotion or whatever that comes with like writing would have like really thrown me off. Like I would have been like so nervous about it. I would have been so anxious. I'd be like, I'll never write again. Like I don't know. I don't even know like how to diagram a sentence. I don't know like what's an adjective anymore. Like I would have just spiraled all completely off the walls. But for some reason, like I think just the gravity of everything happening around me, like actually in a sense also grounded like the way I was thinking about art making to begin with, right? So it was important for me to realize and to recalibrate like, all right, what is productivity anyway? What does it mean? Why does it matter? Like, should I care? And because the world is asking me to be productive from being locked inside my own home. It's like a very while people are losing their jobs and people are passing away, and I'm keep getting phone calls about like, did you hear about some? You know what I mean? Like, while all that's going on, and I was just like, okay, that like it kind of moved me differently. And so what I've been thinking, right, is even though I haven't been writing, it's one of those things like as a poet, as a writer, like even when you're not writing, you're writing. And you know what I mean? Like it's just getting like rather than being stowed away like in a in a notebook or something, it's just stowed away in your body until the time for it to come is here, right? And so eventually all this living that's been happening for the past year and change is going to find its way out onto a page at some point in some form. I don't know what form, but at some point in some form. And so I'm just kind of invested in that idea of like, the writing also being the living, if that makes sense. And I think that's a very liberating kind of space for me personally.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful answer. And I wonder, what it was like for you to do writing related things, like, organizing events and trying to do a virtual book tour. That's like, that takes so much out of you. And so I wonder, what it was like for you. But for me, I haven't written a lot of poems in the past year and in the past like 1,000 years, but I'm writing a dissertation on poetry. So in a way, I'm very deeply engaged in poetry. Like I'm trying to kind of contextualize my place in literary history as well, not only in the United States but also in Korea. Actually, the Korean translation of my book came out in Korea last year, so I got to kind of relive that again, and it helped me think about what I really meant when I wrote these poems, because I was in close contact with the translator, and since we both speak all the languages, it was really interesting to think about the translation choices with her. Like, for example, like, the word ordinary or the word misfortune, which appear a lot in my book. I wondered, what did I really mean, right? And I mean, I took it from a history book. It was a phrase in a history book. But in translation, I was like, I don't necessarily mean ordinary as in normal or mundane. I mean something else. So it helped me kind of get to the core of the spirit of my book. Yeah, what else did I want to say? But yeah, I mean, the pandemic really put everything into perspective, and I found myself kind of gravitating towards the essay form as well. I realized there are many more things I want to say, and I think I kind of experimented with the essay form. I don't know if I'm succeeding. I feel like when I'm writing prose, I'm going like kind of rococo with all the details. Like in poetry, you have to be succinct with like the description and the imagery, and then in prose, I'm like, here's everything I notice, So it's interesting how verbose I can be. Yeah, I had something else I wanted to bring up, but I forget. So Rachel, you go.
Your point about the things that happen to bring a book into the world is a good one, because I mentioned this briefly earlier, but I got a phone call from Peter Connors at BOA on January 11th. I'll never forget it. 2020. I was at my in-laws' house, and I literally just laid down on the floor and was like, "Oh, we're bringing a book out." So at that point, I thought, okay, January 2020, the book's coming out April 2021. Here's what that's going to look like. January 2020, Rachel is imagining her book tour. She's imagining which city she wants to go to, where she wants to do her launch. And then, of course, March 2020 came. And the thing that I think really saved me emotionally and in terms of my mental health during COVID was that there was this project that I had to work on, which is, as you mentioned, Emily, like, it's not so much that you sign a contract and then all those things fall into place, especially for poetry books. Like, we all plan our own book tours. We plan our own, we really hustle our own books in ways that maybe other genres it may be different. But I was working on copy edits. I was starting to think about who to ask for blurbs. And so it is labor, and it is writing related for sure. And I sort of used that as a way to kind of tell myself I was still moving forward with a project. But I was really, in the beginning, especially, really beating myself up about not writing. And I think part of it is kind of, I got to the place where, Cortney, what you said really resonated with me, like the noticing place where I was like, I'm living through, I hate the word unprecedented now so much, but it does apply here, right? An unprecedented time. And I want to remember all these details. I want to remember the stories my spouse comes home with from the hospital. I want to remember what it was like when I found out that my grandmother had COVID. She's fine. She's totally fine. But I remember that moment, like, I need to be attentive to the very quick, fast, and really devastating speed of my life right now. Because before that, I had ups and downs, but it wasn't quite at this pitch and this timbre. And so I had this sort of steady thing in the background with preparing for the tour and the books. And shout out majorly to my friends who did this in 2020, because they were the ones that helped me do this in 2021. But now I'm starting to do what I did again for the Naomi Letters, which is wake up really early in the morning in a room where my phone is not, and I have a notebook and a pen, and I'm trying to write a little bit, like 15 minutes in the morning, a couple of days a week. So that's kind of where I've set the bar right now. But I do kind of feel like I'm slowly starting to realize what I've noticed and what I'm still noticing. And that's about where I've gotten. Yeah, it's tough, but we'll find a way through it, We'll keep noticing.
Yeah, I think kind of on that note, Rachel, like, it makes me think of like patience, right? And like, what's for you two, like, what is patience for a writer? What does that mean? And why is it important, right? Like, because I think patience is vital. And at the same time, I also understand that some things are urgent. So, and sometimes we write and we want to express urgently as well. So those two things are, I don't think of them as diametrically opposed in my mind at all, but I understand how, like, on the level of language, like, those seem like opposing ideas, right? So I'm like, in a time that we've been living through that is both urgent and required so much patience, like, what is that doing for you guys in your writing, or how you think of your writing, I should say, maybe. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, no, I have a quick answer to that, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I think I've become more patient as I've gotten older with the speed at how all of these things happen. I think I am trying to be more urgent with my attention, but more patient with the whatever it becomes, if that makes sense. So, like, the early in the morning thing is really important, because I wake up with the least like, I'm a very anxious person, and the second I start filling my brain with the news, or I go on social media, or I look at texts from my family members if something's going on, it's like the urgency is gone. I've lost the moment. So I've tried to be more urgent with my attention, and urgent with that, like, feeling like it's important to keep that, reading and writing practice going, but then being much more patient with whatever that creates, not feeling like, because someone asked me the other day, like, what's your next book going to be about? And I was like, I can't, I'm not there yet. But I would have been asking myself that question a few years ago too, right? When my first book came out, I was like, all right, what's the next book? You have work to do. And now I'm trying to be much more patient with that part. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, as soon as your book comes out, people want to know what you're working on right this moment, what your next project is. And yeah, I think about patience a lot too, because I don't want to rush anything. But now that I think there is a more like concrete sense of, you know, audience when you have the book, it's like you feel like you need to kind of respond to these maybe challenges, demands, or, you know, support from your community. So it's difficult thing. It's a difficult thing to juggle. And sometimes I wonder, am I being patient with myself or am I paralyzed? um, and that's like that's been more difficult this past year, right? Like I feel like I can't move sometimes. I wrote a really sappy poem a couple weeks ago about friendship, and you know, maybe I'll write another friendship poem, you know, about this reading or about you two. You know, Rachel, we went to get dumplings like, you know, early March 2020 before everything, you know, got ruined. And we were like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, that was AWP, right? That was when we were supposed to be at AWP.
Yeah, we just canceled our trips to AWP and we were bummed about it, but also like something's gonna happen, you know? So like I remember that so clearly. But it's weird because so much feels like a blur. So many more recent things feel like a blur. So anyway, I wrote a sappy poem about friendship and it made me feel good. You know, I remember that, oh, writing poetry can be such a release for me. And again, it could be a safe place for me to go in my mind. So I think I want to write more poems that risk sentimentality, right? That risk softness, that risk just being really corny, you know, and it's fine. I don't have to show it to anyone. And, you know, if I do, that's cool too. So maybe that's a way of exercising patience, just going to that emotional place.
Yeah, thanks I loved both of those responses. I'm definitely like taking something from what each of you said, like, and yeah, and another thing that you mentioned, Emily, I guess kind of in your answer, right? And I think we're all kind of encountering this, like first book, second book doesn't matter, but like when you are in community, right? Like what the type of you know, I can't even say expectations because they don't feel like anyone's imposing them on you, but you feel it nonetheless, right? Like, and I'm wondering, right, how have you both kind of navigated kind of that, like this idea that maybe you have responsibility or something to your community, your audience, or whatever, right, versus the responsibility you have to yourself and to your work, and kind of like where your work falls on that spectrum. Like, you know, is it for me or is it for everyone? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's something I'm always struggling to navigate. So I'd be curious to see hear how you all approach that.
You know, I've been thinking about this a lot in regards to the different kinds of responses I get from readers of my work who are reading it like as fellow poets versus, you know, like the non-writing communities that we're in. And I've noticed with my first book, for example, like I did some readings in synagogues, which I would have never thought to do, and would have like some adorable like old Jewish ladies come up from my grandmother's synagogue and be like, this poem reminded me of, you know, people that I had never thought of as like a reader of my work, really connecting with it. And this time around, these letters all started as private. I was not even thinking of them as poems. And in fact, the earlier drafts, I'm a more traditionally like a more lyric poet, and these are all long, you know, sentence end stop lines. So I was originally like, these are drafts towards poems. I'm just writing these private notes to myself. So I was really not conceiving of audience in the beginning at all. I was sort of just like, I'm writing through some tough shit while I find a home for that other manuscript that I think is done. I don't know. But now I'm starting to feel really invigorated by just sort of finding different communities, and I think this format really helps too. Like I mean, even just thinking about the three of us in a space together at the same time when Emily's in Hawaii, you know, like the way that we can build community in this new format, in this new world, is very invigorating to me. That was something I'd originally thought, oh, virtual tour. And now I'm like, I don't know, this is actually a really, like, I'm able to engage with people and hear people really enjoy my work in ways that I had not thought possible when I was thinking of how we build community and poetry spaces only in the physical, like, world. But I do struggle with that too. You know, I worry a lot about the tension between writing of the self and then speaking on behalf of a community, you know, even if it is your community or one of your many communities. I don't really have a tight answer to that, more than it's just a tension I really think about a lot in my work. Like, people read you as the representative of your community when they encounter your work. And sometimes I'm not a model member of that community. You know, that came up a lot with my first book. Like, I don't go to synagogue. I got interviewed by a woman who was like, which synagogue do you go to? And I was like, I don't belong to one. And that kind of, yeah, exactly. That was, she made this, like, I could hear her face over the phone. Right. So sometimes it's complicated. You want to be a messy, you know, not always model representative of the voices in which you write for. So it is a difficult thing, but at the same time, I am who I am. I am in those spaces. So yeah, I love this question.
Yeah, I want to hear what you think, Cortney, about that question as well. So I want to just keep my answer quick, but, you know, I always think of literature's greatest power is empathy, right? And I think that's just the goal that I always had in my mind, but you know, it's kind of in line with what I said previously, but I'm trying to be maybe more patient and more empathetic toward myself and be grateful for all the things that poetry brought me, other than, you know, my professional experience and the writing. Like, I thought one day lying down, you know, if I don't write a poem ever again in my life, I hope that doesn't happen, but I'm still so thankful for all the poets in my life and all the relationship and all the spaces that I've been in, like this one. And, you know, trying to make peace with that, and just remind myself I'm not measured by my productivity, you know, and that's so ingrained in you as a graduate student as well. And, you know, my time at Chicago is like ticking. So yeah, that's a question I'm kind of productively struggling with, Cortney, I think. And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think one thing that was helpful for me to hear from you in your response, Emily, was like this, was like, you know, the power of empathy, like that being one of literature's great powers, right? And I think where I've struggled, right, is applying that empathy to myself. Like, and I think, you know, like, I'm someone who cares deeply about people. I care deeply and want to see, you know, the best for everyone. I see the best in everyone. But I'm also someone who, even though I'm striving, right, you know, I'm not perfect, right? So I often think about, like, at what point is what I do, my labor, whether that is artistic labor or whatever else, organizing, editing, whatever, like, how is that being used, and is it in service of what I want it to be? And am I doing the best that I possibly can? But I think I've worried so much about that aspect of it. I haven't asked what it requires of me, what it takes of me, like my energy, my focus, and everything else. And I'm trying to learn to be and extend the grace that I try to give to others, to myself. And that's been like the project of this whole pandemic for me. Like, you know, I've had some, you know, things where it's like, oh, that didn't go right, or I messed up here. And I'm trying to learn that doesn't mean that I can't still be a member of a community and a good member of a community and all of that. So I think for me, that's been like the most difficult thing to grasp, right? Because of this feeling that I have visibility, and with that comes responsibility, like kind of like that old, you know, Peter Parker Spider-Man quote, like, with great power, you know. But I have to make sure that I'm being fair and reasonable and tending to myself and my own needs in that process as well. And I have not done a good job at that. So I'm trying to be that much better. But that's kind of how I'm struggling through it. But that's why I was like really interested to hear how you all kind of, process that and go through it in your own way, to see what I could glean that might work for me too.
I think we might be just out of time.
I think so. There's HL. What up?
Hey, Ishmael.
Bye.
Hello.
Thank you all so much. I love you all. I
Love
wish
you.
we could be in person,
Yes.
laughing and
Yes.
eating and crying together.
Yes.
Please, y'all, please get the Naomi Letters. If you don't already have them, get Emily and Cortney's books as well. Congrats to Cortney on, releasing your book about 2 months or so ago. Go get that from Haymarket. There's a very, very easy, simple green button at the bottom of your screen where you can buy everyone's books. We have a couple signed copies left of the Naomi Letters. We also have Emily and Cortney's books as well. I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here this evening. I miss you all and hope that we can read and share poems and talk shit together soon. Good night, everyone.